fellow Americans.
You might be wondering, why in the world is there a 30-minute countdown before the show starts? Well, we actually start live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, so this whole 30-minute countdown is a chance for YouTube and Rumble to send out their alerts and notifications, so we encourage you to gather up and hang out with everyone in the chat room. So every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time is when we do this show live. You can join us for the countdown if you like, or just set your clock and reminder that at 4 p.m. Eastern is when we go live. You can also make sure you subscribe and turn on that bell notification, so hopefully you will get a notification.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting? Just a moment.
I'm not defending them in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planning information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually, the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, a two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding disinformation? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun, it's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have standards?
But here's the problem. We can't even agree. We can't even agree what disinformation is. You can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals
So
are
do you
not
think
impinged.
do you think
Number
COVID
one.
do you think
And
COVID
number
do you think
two,
COVID
if I may,
do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this as a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
Hey everyone, just as a reminder, our show starts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, just a few minutes from now, but I should remind you that we have a daily newsletter. It's totally free. Natalie and I work very hard on it every morning over a cup of coffee, putting the stories together that we think are important that the mainstream media is going to ignore. All you need to do is go to our website. It's just redacted.inc. Put in your email address. We won't ever sell your email to anybody. And then you'll receive a welcome email. And all you need to do is verify that email, and 7 a.m. Eastern Time is when we send out our daily newsletter. And it's about 5 or 10 minutes in length that you can read it over your cup of coffee. And like I said, we cover 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day, plus a couple of things you might have missed while you were sleeping. We try to have some fun with it, add a little humor into it. And again, it's a great way to start off your morning. But it's also a great way for us to stay connected with you as well, because we've been banned and blocked on some of these platforms before, where we haven't been allowed to post anything, not even a community post. So the only way for us to stay connected with you is through our newsletter. We were able to send out a newsletter and say, hey everyone, we're blocked for the next week, and let you know what was actually going on with our show. Anyway, go to redacted.inc and sign up for the free newsletter, and it'll be posted first thing in the morning over your cup of coffee.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons and the capability to rapidly produce more, many more. And he has the ability to dispense these lethal poisons and diseases in ways that can cause massive death and destruction. If biological weapons seem too terrible to contemplate, chemical weapons are equally chilling. UNMOVIC already laid out much of this, and it is documented for all of us to read in UNSCOM's 1999 report on the subject. If we consider just one category of missing weaponry, 6,500 bombs from the Iran-Iraq war, UNMOVIC says the amount of chemical agent in them would be on the order of 1,000 tons. These quantities of chemical weapons are now unaccounted for. Dr. Blick says, quipped that, quote, mustard gas is not marmalade. You are supposed to know what you did with it. We believe Saddam Hussein knows what he did with it, and he has not come clean with the international community. We have evidence these weapons existed. What we don't have is evidence from Iraq that they have been destroyed or where they are. That is what we are still waiting for.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The majors' assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone. Or to take the nation to war partway. Or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip. Because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector. You didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Scott, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, They get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you gotta come in and talk to me a second." He says, "We've made the decision, we're going to war with Iraq." I said, "We're going to war with Iraq? Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Hey everyone, Clayton here. The show is going to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. I should remind you that we have a VIP community. It's our Redacted Rebel VIP community. Now, this show is totally free, what you're watching right now, right? You can subscribe here on YouTube and Rumble, totally free. But if you'd like to support independent journalism, we are run by you. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this show. We wouldn't be able to hire the team that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the servers that we have. We wouldn't be able to afford the reporters that we have, the team that we have. So you can support us by going to redacted.inc, and on the right side of your screen, you'll see a VIP community button. Just click that, and for the price of a cup of coffee once a month, you can support us. We put out exclusive content, early interviews that no one else will see, live streams just for our VIP Rebel community. So again, it's totally free to watch this show, but if you do want to support independent journalism, we would really appreciate it. Come on over to redacted.inc, click on that community button, and decide if you want to sign up or not. It's totally up to you. We thank you. And meanwhile, the show will start in just a few moments at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, one of the 4 principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Hey everybody, welcome to Redacted on this Tuesday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natalie Morris.
And on this show, we tend to cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores or the corporate media largely ignores. And we're going to talk about Ukraine tonight to kick things off in our show because it is a recruitment nightmare right now for the Ukrainian military. They have run out of men, so they've literally lowered the standards to the bare bones minimum, which is people with mental illnesses, diseases, HIV, tuberculosis. This is the makeup of the Ukrainian army. But beyond even that, we're going to tell you what Europe is doing, which is really stunning, because they're actually about to kick out a number of Ukrainian men of fighting age to ship them back to Ukraine because Ukraine is calling on Europe, hey, we need these men. So get ready for all those quote-unquote refugees to be sent back home in order to go into the meat grinder. This is just awful.
It's awful. Do you remember about a year ago, Westerners were patting themselves on the back? What's the expression? Don't break your arm, patting yourself on the back. Patting themselves on the back for being so open to Ukrainian refugees. And now, at least one European country is saying, we'll find them for you and send them back if you'd like to send them back to the front lines. So anyone who felt superior about helping refugees can just go screw right off.
Also, we're going to talk about lockdowns 2.0 and a number of big breaking news items this afternoon from the White House on mask mandates, on what is actually happening with school closures, what is the TSA planning. We're going to run down all of the latest COVID news and information, plus that. And
I love that you called my last story Perverts. The story we're going to talk about, we just titled Perverts. We are going to talk about
And we're going to talk about perverts.
There's more to it than that.
Well, no, that's how you labeled it in this.
I put it as a placeholder, and sometimes Clayton, jazzes up those headlines. He did not. So what
I used my jazz hands to, and to be fair, it was Philip that did it, and it is perverts. It's pedophile perverts.
We're going to talk about what they're calling now youth sexuality and how, it's totally fine if it involves adults. I don't think that's fine. We're going to talk about what now academia is arguing that we need to stop canceling pedophiles.
Perverts.
That's who you need to stand up for in this world.
Yeah.
Some people, that's their life's mission.
That and so much more as Redacted starts right now.
I guess that's my sign that I need to get eyes on a few more things before we get started.
Yeah, you put it in there.
I only saw that live.
Perverts.
Oh, perverts is what it says on the screen.
That's the story. I mean, that's how you sum it up is perverts.
I am the least creative person out there, and so if you just title it Perverts, I'm going to be like,
you're going to go with it.
He's running with it.
I'm going to go with Perverts.
I did go to journalism school, and I failed the test for headline writing. It was very specific because it was back in the day when you had to have a headline fit certain columns, so they'd give you a number, and each capital was worth like 1.5, and I could never figure that out, how to make it catchy in the space provided. Now we don't have that anymore, but this was journalism school back in the year 2000.
Yeah, you would not have worked at the New York Post, which does those killer headlines,
No.
Killer, yeah. Go ahead, Philip.
I was a biology major, so if I had it my way, it said perverts, an academic look into blah, 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 and it wouldn't fit on our screen. So that's why I had to shorten it.
We should have an engineer write our headlines from now on. Yeah.
Okay.
Be 30 sentences long and highly detailed.
I think we got them with perverts. They want to talk about it.
All right. Hey, we've got a lot more to get to tonight. We've got a very busy show, so I don't want to waste a lot of time tonight. But I do want to tell you about our newsletter, which publishes first thing in the morning. We have to tell you about this because it's our way to stay connected with you. If you go to redacted.inc, that's the website, not .com, and then put in your email address and click subscribe to our daily newsletter, then you will receive a welcome email, and you have to confirm that, like Gmail and Yahoo, and they love to put us in the spam folder or Gmail has labeled us as dangerous. So it might be in your dangerous folder. Then just click on it and confirm it. And then tomorrow morning at about 7 a.m. Eastern time, you'll receive the newsletter. You can read it in about 5 or 10 minutes. We cover about 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day. We usually start off with a little something you might have missed, a little funny something to kick off your morning. And then a few items, little news items that you might have missed while you were sleeping. We covered, of course, some of the latest revelations about Jill Biden and COVID. And we covered a lot of that today in the newsletter, as well as Ukraine and some other big stories. So again, go to redacted.inc and subscribe. And then tomorrow morning, you will receive the newsletter first thing in the morning. And we always have a link to last night's show in the newsletter in case you missed the live show. You can go back and watch the full live stream. We always try to put a link in the newsletter for you in case you missed it from the night before. So again, once again, redacted.inc. Well, they're calling it Ukraine's zombie army. Ukrainian men riddled with HIV, mental disorders, tuberculosis, and more being listed as fit for duty, fit for military service, zombies that they can basically throw into the meat grinder as cannon fodder. And now Europe is getting involved in this. Remember all those military-age men, those refugees who fled Ukraine to Poland and other countries throughout Europe and the West? Well, now Ukraine is asking those countries, please send those men back. We need those men. We need those men to fight and die on the front lines. Poland leading that charge. Poland says it will round up Ukrainians of military age and extradite them in order to send them to war. Mike Krupa is a Polish journalist, historian, and host of Vodom TV, and he joins us from Warsaw, Poland today. Mike, good to see you.
Good to see you. Hi, Clinton. Good to be back.
Yeah, this is a stunning turn of events, a stunning story. And I have to wonder how many other European countries are quietly doing this, or maybe will even publicly do this, send Ukrainian men they know they are harboring back to Ukraine because Ukrainians asking for that. But I want to focus specifically on the Polish side because we have confirmation from the Polish government and from the newspaper Rzeczpospolita. Am I saying that correctly? The newspaper.
Rzeczpospolita. Yeah,
I was
pretty
never
good
going to
for
get
an
that.
American living in Portugal. So that's good enough. Good enough.
So they say about 80,000 Ukrainians are unaccounted for, having crossed into Poland, and they are ready to send these men back to Poland. This is back to Ukraine. This is stunning, Mike.
Yeah, from the reporting that initially came out of Rzeczpospolita, they were the first ones to actually report on this, that Poland was actually taking action to get these guys back to Ukraine. It seems that around 80,000, just north of 80,000 Ukrainians who are eligible to be mobilized are in Poland, but the question is, how do we find them now? Now, the way that the newspaper explained how they would go about is the Ukrainians would have to basically produce international arrest warrants that would be transferred to Interpol. Interpol would then be the primary source, for example, for a Polish police officer stopping, for example, a car in Poland and asking for Ukrainian ID. And if they were in the system, they would be sent to the prosecutor's office, and the Polish court at the end of the day would be the one to decide their fate. Last year, by the way, that same Rzeczpospolita, they reported, it was about the same time, basically beginning of September, end of August, pretty much, that around 500,000 Ukrainians that were eligible to serve in the Ukrainian army crossed into Poland. Now, that doesn't mean that they stayed in Poland, but they crossed the Polish border. Where they are right now is anyone's guess. That number of 80,000 was provided by the border guard. So it's based on their statistics and from what they're seeing, and I'm guessing from the sources that they're getting from Kiev, that this is about the number of or in military aid, so to say, that could be transferred back to Ukraine, to the front line, essentially. But the question is, how do we find them in Poland right now?
That is unbelievable. So international arrest warrants. And now this is an unbelievable burden on the Polish government. It was already an unbelievable burden on the Polish government to have all of these refugees in Poland, but now being sort of tasked and forced to send out police to try to track these people down if they're in hiding now and use police resources in order to find these individuals?
I don't think there's going to be a concerted effort whereby there's going to be, Operation Find the Ukrainian in Poland, so to say. But I think that based on the source, the Interpol source, where all the names of these guys are going to be based, should they find, for example, I don't know, a guy working in construction, or they pull somebody over on the street and they say, okay, you're on that list, then we have to send notification to the prosecutor's office, and then the court will decide whether we're going to send you back to Ukraine or not. Because a lot of these guys, as the Ukrainian David Arahamia, the MP who came out with this proposition, he stated that a lot of them left Ukraine because basically they bribed somebody to come into Poland. Now, I can tell you from the amount of luxury cars that I'm seeing, especially in Warsaw, but also in other major cities like Wrocław or Kraków, you don't see those kind of cars, riding around in Polish streets, even in the bigger cities. So it's, Porsche, Lamborghinis, for example, the higher end Mercedes. So it was kind of surprising to see how these guys managed to escape. And I'm guessing that most of them were between the age of 18 and 60. So they were eligible for military service. Now, the question is that everybody is asking themselves right now, are they going to be doing more bribing in Poland in order to make sure that the Polish cops and the Polish, the authorities leave them alone, to not give them a court notification to send them back or, remain in Poland?
Right. It's unbelievable. Now, Mike, I don't know if you recall this. Here was a New York Times graph. We covered this on the show at the time, back in early part of February or into March, when you had all of these refugees fleeing into Poland and other parts of Europe. And the way that the New York Times portrayed it was, you had millions or so leaving. In the graph, they had about 499,000, and they called them refugees, right? Leaving Ukraine, going into Europe, those were refugees. But if you left Ukraine and you went into Russia, you were labeled a migrant. And they put it in really small print in their little New York Times graph, and they made it, they color the arrow black, like you're going to seek refuge basically in Russia, but you'll be labeled a migrant, and otherwise you're a refugee going to these other countries, and you need our love and support. And now it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't know yet, but these migrants who went into Russia, the irony of ironies is that they may be safer, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think it was a conscious decision on the part of a lot of mainstream, Western outlets, because how can you find refuge in Russia? I mean, the only thing you could be going to Russia for is to, get instructions from Vladimir Putin how to conduct sabotage operations in Ukraine, for example. That was the sort of underlying understanding that was being pushed, because, as you noted, the terminology was completely different. But as of today, the Ukrainians that left for Russia, the ones with the Ukrainian passports who want to remain Ukrainian citizens, whether they come back or not, but they're not the ones being mobilized. So they found safe haven in Russia, and nobody's going to be running around and, throwing them in the military, unless, for example, they want to volunteer. They could be ethnic Russians with Ukrainian passports who would want to go back to Ukraine to fight on the side of Russia against the Kiev regime. But the situation is different in Poland, because most of these guys, and, I see a lot of them on the street, they're having a good time. They're frolicking around. They're hanging out with the chicks. They're drinking beer. The last thing they want to do is to go back to Ukraine, and the very last thing they want to do is to go on, on a couple of day training course to go to the meat grinder in the Eastern Front. So it's sort of like reminiscent of what happened in World War II. The Germans always said, "I'd rather serve on a U-boat than go on the Eastern Front." Well, it's the same thing right now with these, beer drinking and fun frolicking Ukrainians who are having the time of their life in Poland right now.
Do you think that this is going to happen more broadly? We talked about it at the beginning throughout Europe, that you'll have other countries, you'll have Spain, you'll have Portugal, you'll have the UK and others that are going to say, well, Zelensky has called us and asked us to send these men back, and we need to comply, right? That's how we support their war effort, is send these men back basically to die.
I've heard some rumblings from Germany that they're already starting to do the same thing. Now, there's going to be a sort of paradox in all this, because the multicultural lobby, the liberals, the open borders crowd, although they all have Ukrainian flags on their Twitter accounts, they're going to have a sort of, they're going to be a little bit confused right now, because on the one hand, they want Ukraine to win against, Vladimir Putin. But on the other hand, how can you send these guys back to die? So they're going to turn on their, welcome refugees hats and say, no, we can't send them back. But if you don't send them back, Ukraine's going to lose. So they're going to have a paradox where they're going to mellow in their own sort of contradictions. But I'm guessing for a lot of Western European countries, this will be a justified way of sending a lot of these so-called Ukrainian refugees back, because apart from Poland, I'm hearing of a lot of stories that, these Ukrainians are causing problems in other Western European cities. As Western European countries, the best argument to send them back would be not, just forced deportation because we don't want you here, but hey, Ukraine needs you because we're all in this fight to destroy Vladimir Putin. You got to have the hands to do it, right? So go back to your country. So in a way, I think many liberals might be bought by this in the sense that, yeah, this is the humanitarian way to send them back to Ukraine, so to say. But I think a lot of them will show their sort of, inherent stupidity by protesting the forced sending back of these guys to Ukraine, even though they're being called by Zelensky himself to come back and fight against the Russians in the east. So it's sort of a paradox, but this is where we are, I guess.
In Poland, I'm curious, what is the beat on the street there, hearing about this idea that Poland, which had been weighted down tremendously by the burden of supporting all of these refugees, what do you think the response is going to be just from the average Polish citizen that these people are going to be extradited?
Well, I've seen varied comments, especially in the social media sphere, varying from, hey, Polish police, I help you catch these guys myself for free, to, it's kind of too late for that now because, the war has been going on. This should have been policy from February 24th. I mean, no matter what you think of the Kiev regime, but with an open borders policy essentially up until today, because it'll be hard to implement it one way or another. But you should have been checking these guys from the very start, from February 24th. And I've always been saying, even before the war, when we were having the slow influx of about 2 million Ukrainians coming into Poland, formal migrants, obviously, as cheap labor, I was saying, well, there's a frozen conflict in Ukraine. If we're accepting all these men, we're in essence weakening Ukraine, so we're weakening our cause. So either we're only using Ukraine or we're genuinely stupid because we're depriving them of the manpower that they need to fight the Russians in the east. So a lot of people are sort of poking fun at this right now in Poland, although in general there is an agreement that, this should have been the policy from the beginning, that these guys should not be let in and they should remain in Ukraine if we are sincerely trying to back, Ukraine's defense against so-called imperialist Russia. So that's sort of the vibes that I'm getting from what I'm seeing in Poland.
Be interesting to see who foots the bill for this. I mean, you're not just going to drive one individual back to Ukraine. You can get buses, or you're going to have escorts, airplanes are going to be transporting these individuals. Somebody's going to be footing the bill for this. This is not going to be a cheap operation.
Well, I think you're looking at one of those guys who's going to be footing the bill, so I'm right here, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm sure that's the case. Poland and, of course, NATO and the United States will be sending in taxpayer dollars as well. Mike Krupa, great to see you. Thank you so much for your insights from Poland. This is an unbelievable story. Thank you so much.
Thanks again, Clayton.
Unbelievable is right. What happened to the West as this savior of Ukraine?
Right.
We were so proud of ourselves.
The refugee home. You come here, get your, donate clothing and all of these things.
Yeah. All the clothing drives and everything. We were so happy for these families to bring them into, they got fast passes to visas. We got to bring them into entire family sponsorships.
When you say
we in the West,
okay, just be careful.
Western
people
media.
are always like, Natalie, why? No, yes, the collective West. There was all this virtue signaling, people putting their profile pictures. We're doing, oh yeah, what about all the Kenyan families? What about all the Yemenis families? What about the Syrian families? Oh no, we don't care about them. But if they're Ukrainian, yes, if they're white skinned, we will take them in and take care of them.
But we cared enough. We had moms groups that were asking for things, saying, oh, we got a Ukrainian family and we need a car seat. And I had some extras. So yes, absolutely, you can have my car seat. I care about everybody equally. And so I absolutely don't want these families that are here now to be sent back any more than I want any refugee from Syria to be sent back. I don't want that. And so that rings so hollow if you were someone who was so excited to put on your profile picture how generous the West was, and then can, find a way to look the other way when we need to deport them to go back to war. It's awful.
But how in the world do they know every single Ukrainian that's there? If they just tear up their papers, how are they going to know they're Ukrainian? Do they have them in specific places and track them, trackers on them?
What they have said is
what we talked about in the interview is specifically that's one of the questions I asked him was about, if you have this sort of international arrest warrant that's available, then Interpol or whatever will, if they apply for a job, et cetera, then that will be sort of run through the database there, and they'll be able to say, wait a second, you're coming up in this database. We can't exactly give you this job. You're wanted back in Ukraine, and we need to contact the authorities. So that was my question too, is like, well, how much money is it going to cost the West to
Right.
try to go after these individuals, round them up?
The Polish police spokesperson said, for example, during a simple check on the road, they could just be pulling people over, like papers, please type thing. Ironically enough, I don't know if you recall, do we have the image of the Wall Street Journal, had told us that people who were fleeing west to European countries were refugees, but there were hundreds of thousands who went to Russia, and they just called them migrants. And so...
Yeah, that's what I just asked Mike as well.
Right.
It's like, it's a crazy thing to see this. It's a New York Times graph that we talked about.
Right.
But it's like this entire arrow of going left is you're a refugee and you need to be saved. And if you're on the right side there, it's in black. It's a black arrow. It's you're a migrant. Look at the color characteristics there too. It's like you're just like a little migrant on the right hand side. But if you're this orange arrow, you need to be saved by the West.
Well, interestingly enough now, which of those groups of people will be less likely to be deported for war now?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know if those people have been offered citizenship. A lot of them did accept passports. So they are at risk of mobilization in the same way that all Russians are. But, they won't be stopped at a traffic stop and then sent back to war.
Yeah.
So,
I just hope there's some countries that are just going to be like, nope, we're not on board.
We're not doing
and
that.
And then they can go there. Yeah, we're not sending them back. We're not extraditing or whatever.
Well, let's talk about this story in Ukraine. Nuclear war is apparently coming. Those are the words of a former top Russian general, Alexander Vladimirov, who wrote Russia's 3-volume book called The General Theory of War. In an interview over the past 24 hours, he says that nuclear war with the West is inevitable. Inevitable. And he doesn't mince words with this either. Nuclear war is inevitable. And he says this is the conclusion of the Ukrainian invasion. And he says basically the goals of Russia and the goals of the West are their survival and historical eternity, he says. And this means that in the name of this, all means of armed struggle available to them will be used, including such a tool as their nuclear weapons, he says. He also warned, I am sure that nuclear weapons will be used in this war, inevitably. From this, neither we nor the enemy have anywhere to go.
Okay.
So this comes as, over the past 24 hours, Ukraine has tried to force NATO into a broader war, invoking Article 5, saying that, hey, this suicide drone that landed in Romania is Russian, and clearly Russia is attacking Romania, and therefore you should invoke Article 5, and therefore NATO goes to war and launches a full-scale war against Russia. To which Romania responded and said, nope, not going to. Nothing, that Russia has done nothing inside of Ukraine or inside of Romanian borders. And they, here it is. Sorry. If I can pull this up, NATO Article 5, this is according to Zero Hedge just a few minutes ago. On Monday, a very similar situation happened. Ukraine's attempt to drag the West into direct shooting with war with Russia has failed. Ukraine's foreign ministry spokesman Oleg Nikolenko said in a written statement that Russian suicide drone struck Romanian territory. Then, of course, he cited, this is yet another confirmation that Russia's missile terror poses a huge threat not only to Ukraine's security, but also to the neighboring countries, including NATO member states, Ukraine said. Well, then Romania quickly rejected this narrative, and its defense ministry refuting the claim, saying the Ministry of National Defense categorically denies information from the public space regarding a so-called situation that occurred the night of September 3rd into the 4th, in which a Russian drone allegedly fell on the national territory of Romania. Basically saying, nope, didn't happen. So this reminds me of what Ukraine tried to do with Poland. Remember, of course, the missile strike, the errant air defense missile that landed inside of Polish territory and apparently killed a number of individuals. And then Zelensky got right on television and was like, we need to go to war. You need to launch a nuclear attack. Article 5, NATO needs to attack Russia. Mm-hmm. So this is absolute desperation here. But, back to this point about nuclear war. I mean, what he's saying is that NATO has had every opportunity to really back off, step back, and call for peace. And instead, they're doing the exact opposite. They're continuing to double down. Now, NATO countries are rounding up Ukrainian men to send them back to the fight. They're continuing to send weapons. The Biden administration just doubled down on more money and weapons to Ukraine. So this ends with some sort of a nuclear strike. This ends with some sort of a tactical nuclear weapon. And he says, Putin is not bluffing about this. If your entire country's future is at stake because NATO has surrounded your country and is going to put nuclear weapons in Finland or other spots right on their doorstep, this is not going to fly.
I mean, put the shoe on the other foot and imagine if it was the BRICS nations building bases in Mexico. Like, well, we made a pact with Mexico, we made a pact with Canada, and we're going to put some BRICS bases there, in those countries. What would we do?
Right.
Yeah, that would never happen. That's why Russia needs its own Monroe Doctrine, like a meaningless piece of paper written in the 1820s by an old president. Says you cannot build military bases in the Western Hemisphere.
Well, they had a bit of it in the Minsk agreements, at least, the sort of spirit of it, and that has been violated. So what would it be worth
It's like when the treaties protect us, we want to keep them. But when they don't, like when it's a treaty that we've signed with another country, we don't care.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we've got more news to get to here on this Tuesday. We're going to look at these lockdowns. And these lockdowns 2.0 are going, apparently, according to plan, with Dr. Jill Biden getting COVID, and an announcement from the White House just a few minutes ago. We'll bring you that on the lockdowns and what this portends for schools and hospitals and masking and vaccines and the whole 9 yards. We're going to talk about all of that. But first,
we want to tell you about our friends over in Indeed, because the thing about running your own business is that every single hire counts, and no hiring partner understands that like Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, Assessment, and virtual interviews. And if you hate waiting, well, Indeed's U.S. data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match their job description the moment they sponsor a job. So that's why you need to check out Indeed and use our URL there to get your special offers. That's Indeed.com/redacted. They know that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Indeed knows hiring needs to be cost-effective when you're running your own business, and they know that finding people with the right skills makes all the difference. So they know that when you're doing everything for your company, you can't afford to overspend on hire or hire the wrong person. So visit Indeed.com/redacted to start hiring right now. Again, that's Indeed.com/redacted. Indeed.com/redacted. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everybody. If you need to hire, you need Indeed.
So someone in the chat here, son of Sarek. Now, is Sarek a Star Trek reference? If it is, props to you. Or maybe you just are the son of a guy named Sarek. Anyway, someone says, son of Sarek says, I hate how YouTube never recommends your channel, even though I try to watch it every day. I know, it's crazy, right? So these, independent media, but specifically media that goes against the corporate narrative, covering the stories that we cover here on this show. I mean, all of the stories that we're covering tonight in the show, YouTube, the corporate media can't stand. They want to tell you that Ukraine is winning the war. So we cover the Ukraine war. We cover what's actually happening there, the truth in this war that they won't tell you. We're covering lockdowns and mask mandates and what's coming with these vaccines and what the CDC is saying. They don't want you to hear about this. They don't want you to hear this truth. We're also going to cover this pervert story tonight in the show. Mainstream media won't cover this story in the show.
No, they are perverts.
Yeah, the mainstream media are. That's true. They are perverts. How many of them have lost their jobs for being perverts? Like from Matt Lauer to...
I lost count.
I mean, the list is endless, right? So, yeah, they're going to tell you. And then like Elon Musk going after the Anti-Defamation League. Like, that's a story they absolutely don't want you to hear. So again, it's so important. Like one thing you can do is to hit that like button, because it actually pushes us further out during a live show. And YouTube actually doesn't control that, surprisingly, during live shows. So if you do hit the like button during the live show, it actually pushes it further out into the algorithm. So that does help, actually. Yeah, it just sucks. They just won't recommend our channel. They'll definitely recommend like a Mr. Beast video or whatever. But when it comes to this stuff, real news, they won't do it. So anyway, thank you guys for subscribing to the channel and at least turning on those bell notifications. So in YouTube's suppression.
Yeah, we do our best here because we are working against the algorithm. It is not your friend. So that's why when we ask you to like and subscribe and share the channel, it does help us in measurable ways. So thank you for pointing out how we are being downranked for being guilty of covering inconvenient truths and helping out and doing your part. I really appreciate it.
And if you do subscribe, your name will pop up here on the big screen. So thank you guys for subscribing and supporting independent journalism. We appreciate it.
And for some reason, a couple people are asking if we're brother and sister. We get this question every so often. We are not. We're married. We're a married couple.
Yeah.
I don't think we look alike, but we do bicker like people who are
siblings sometimes.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, that's our love language.
We've almost been married for 13 years.
Can you believe it? And
a long time.
And Philip and David. Philip's our technical director, and David's our producer. You never see Philip on camera, but they are brothers.
Nope.
Yeah, they are brothers, and they'll get into sibling rivalry sometimes too. Like before the show, like David will have control of the mouse, doing something on their screen remotely, and Philip's like, "Get off! I need to get it." No, and they back and forth. So, it's their love language.
Yeah, that's why we have a familiarity on this show, and we want you to be a part of it. So thanks for joining.
All right, let's talk.
You don't sound good. You sound congested.
I had COVID.
Yeah. You still sound. I was watching back videos from last week when I was sick, and I definitely sounded hoarse. You've still got it. So we're going to bring you this story about lockdowns from people who are recently recovered from COVID again.
All right, let's talk about lockdowns 2.0. And apparently it is going according to plan. So we've been warning you for months on this show that the next wave of lockdowns was coming. As far back as last year, we pointed to evidence of new propaganda being used around new COVID variants that they would use to scare us into submission. Mask mandates, school closures, American TV anchors pushing us into panic mode. Russia warned a few days ago that the United States was planning the next pandemic. Their intelligence, listen to this. Their intelligence services were seeing a push for a new COVID variant as a pretext for all of this. Look at that. Russia claims U.S. preparing for a new pandemic by searching for virus mutations. So Russia was all over this, regardless of how you feel about Russia. Were they right? The new scary variant is called, what is it called?
Parola.
Parola.
Or Varrola.
Parola, Loliola. And it's claimed its first victim. It's claimed its first victim today, Dr. Jill Biden. She was so young. Last night, she tested positive for the new variant. Remember, just so you know, I mean, she didn't die. She's got like the sniffles. So we need to lock down the country as a result. Remember, she is double boosted and double vaccinated. She's double vaxxed and double boosted. And we now know that this new variant really likes vaccinated people.
We absolutely know this, and we covered this last week, that the CDC is telling us that being vaccinated is a risk factor for developing COVID. It literally says, and rewind the tape on the CDC's website, that it is more likely to infect those who have been vaccinated. So, okay, here's your test case. That turns out to be true. That is what a lot of immunologists had warned would happen if we continue to vaccinate. Then the virus could mutate. Seems like that is actually happening. Now, what are they going to do? Because Joe Biden is so old that he is a risk factor just being alive at this point. It's, again, not just because he's old, but because he's old and he's not with it. I don't want to be ageist in any way, shape, or form, but the guy is a walking risk factor, right? So what's the president going to do? Well, Karine Jean-Pierre today said that the president will wear a mask. Well, first she said that he was going to continue to test at a regular cadence and monitor for symptoms. because that's his wife. Who knows when they were together last. And then she further went on to say at the pulpit just today that the president is going to exhibit masking and social distancing a la 2020. Watch what she has to say.
And finally, an update on the president and the first lady since she tested positive for COVID-19 last night. I can tell you that the First Lady is experiencing mild symptoms and will remain in Delaware for the week. President Biden tested negative last night for COVID-19 and tested negative again today. He's not experiencing any symptoms. As far as the steps he is taking, since the president was with the First Lady yesterday, he will be masking while indoors and around people in alignment with CDC guidance. And as has been the practice in the past, the president will remove his mask when sufficiently distanced from others indoors and while outside as well. The CDC guidelines recommend a combination of masking, testing, and monitoring for symptoms. The president is doing all of that in close consultation with his physician.
Okay, so now it's time to go back to those rules. Remember when most of them were dropped?
Yeah.
Now the CDC is saying that if you've tested positive, you should isolate. Now it's 10 days. Remember when they dropped it to 5? They have increased that again. They do say that you should mask indoors, even though the World Health Organization only says that masking may help. They are not saying that it's been proven. Over the weekend, Fauci was asked whether or not, masks really work, because more and more studies are being shown that they don't, and also that they are a risk factor for other respiratory problems. And he said, well, that was one study. There are other studies. He did not bring those studies to tell us what that means and why.
And of course, if you go back to the beginning of COVID, when he was like, "No, you don't need a mask. You don't need a mask. You don't need to do that, any of that stuff," and then he suddenly changed his tune, and now he's continuing.
He even said it's just theater.
Yeah, he said exactly. He said it's theater. If you want to wear it because you feel better about yourself, and you do that, right? So, yeah, this is coming back. Oh, yeah, we just got some breaking news. Also, this variant is taking out all of the people you care about, not just Dr. Jill Biden, but now Whoopi as well.
As you can see, Whoopi is not here. She has COVID. Yes, it's back. It's back. It's back.
Can you believe it?
It's back,
like
she
right
says.
On time.
Well, it's not that it's back because, we saw this spike last fall and we are expecting to live with it as part of our lives. It's that their rules are back.
Yeah. And instead of treating it like we treated it last fall, just like the flu, and okay, who gives a rat's ass at this point? Treat it like you would the flu. Treat it like you would any other seasonal, flu virus. But now you have schools in certain parts of the United States already closing their doors, and counties already considering mandates on masking and also closures as well. In-person learning closing down. So in Kentucky, 2 Kentucky school districts suspended in-person classes due to COVID-19. 3 school districts in the country have also canceled in-person learning. Again, 2 just in Kentucky. All as these local officials right now are trying to they're reporting like such a huge rise in COVID-19. So we need to clamp things down. Watch this Kentucky news report.
First weeks of the academic year, multiple Kentucky school districts are already feeling the impacts of COVID and other sickness. Lee and Magoffin County schools are closed for the rest of the week because of illness. Laurel County is tracking a rise in COVID cases from school-aged children, and the Woodford County Health Department is also seeing an increase in COVID cases.
Yeah. So let's ruin these children's lives even more than we already have by keeping them home for more weeks, taking them out of the academic, face-to-face learning with teachers and the social ability that they get, of course, from that. The amount of damage that was done as a result of keeping kids home during lockdowns.
And plus, the CDC in August updated fatality rates for COVID, and it is hovering between 1% and 2%. That's true. Now, the media sort of ran with that and said, oh, has it been this all along? Have we been lied to? What we know is that in August, the fatality rate was between 1% and 2%, meaning between 1% or 2% of people who test positive for COVID will have a rough time and it could end their lives. Now, is this a proportionate response to something that does now, and I know you were not supposed to say this in the height of the pandemic, but it does now have a fatality rate that equals the flu? So why would we do this?
Well,
this is something we need to ask ourselves.
And also another frustrating thing is there's actually no data supporting that kids can't get through COVID, and there's actual factual data that backs up that the masks and the mandates hurt them. So it's like they're going on the side where there's no data against the no data to back things that have tons of data.
Yes.
That makes no sense.
I could, in looking at the prep for this story, I'm like, well, I can bring these stories about masking. I can bring these stories about vaccination. I can bring these stories about in-person learning. I can bring these stories about natural immunity. I can bring all sorts of, I feel like I shouldn't need to. We should universally accept that we did those things wrong and that we should not repeat it. But it seems like the narrative right now is, let's do that again.
Well, I just don't understand. And again, this is happening in multiple parts of the country, and you're hearing this now from the White House. Like, this is, people can like sort of blindly fall for this, and they're going to go along and say, no, this is not happening. It's not happening in my neck of the woods. Great. That's amazing. Okay. Well, then you don't live in Kentucky where this is happening. You don't live in South Texas where it's actually happening. You don't live in New York where it's happening. And you don't live in Los Angeles County where it's now being talked about. So here was a mask-wearing LA County Public Health Director, Barbara Ferrer, encouraging masks, ventilation, hand washing, and vaccines during this COVID meeting that they just had over the past, I think it was 48 hours ago. Watch.
At this point, when should people wear masks in schools, and is it ever mandatory?
Well, ever is not a word I'm comfortable with. Everyone knows that, I think by now, that, there's no place for, that level of certainty with this pandemic at this point. So I'm not going to say there's never going to be a time where we might need to all put our masks back on.
Okay. So there she is giving a speech way back from an audience, wearing a mask the whole time. I mean, this is the madness that we're starting to see creeping up again at airports.
I mean, again, I can also bring studies that show that those single-use masks have very high level of toxins, and we are still in warm weather, and the toxins release at higher concentrations in warm weather. So, okay, again, all of these things, I could bring them. I've been, we've been looking at this all along. We'd be here all day. This should be a foregone conclusion by now.
So New York schools. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm kind of working on a thing for locals, a story, and I've been tracking Twitter on all of these MDs and doctors and stuff that are now saying masks and all this other stuff. And if you look at that, it's like, shouldn't we be questioning the credentials of medical professionals that are still pushing that type of thing, knowing all of the data that they've seen?
Yeah, Philip, let's skip the let's go to the next one here, the TV doctors sound, because this is exactly this. This is TV doctors. You've seen a number of them. These are TV doctors. I don't know what they're doing, but they're popping up on a lot of local news stations saying, yeah, mask up, take the vaccines, stay at home when necessary, do all of these things once again if you get COVID. Watch.
So there are these transmissible, meaning contagious Omicron subvariants running around right now. The BA.286 variant is the one that scientists are watching most closely. There's only been a handful of confirmed cases in the U.S., but it is a variant of interest because it's so contagious. I want to be clear, though, there's no indication that it causes more severe or more serious disease than any of the other strains of COVID. In terms of what people can do, this is the time to double down on what we know already works. Stay up to date on all of your vaccinations, including the new COVID booster that's coming this September. Wash your hands, wear masks when it's appropriate, test when you feel sick, and stay home if you test positive for COVID.
So a lot of people in the chat saying, do not comply, do not comply. Yes, but this is the thing. When they force this on people once again in public transportation, your bus routes, your subways, your airlines, what are you going to do? Like, this is coming.
I just wonder why she says these are the things we already know work.
Right. Everything she just said is a lie.
The FDA has not fully approved the COVID vaccine, so we don't have full clinical trials, especially of the updated booster. We absolutely
and she would have been more correct.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, she'd have been more correct to say we know they do not work.
Yeah, if she just would have reversed it.
One word in there.
Yeah, she would have reversed it. Then her statement would have been correct. Everything she just said was inaccurate.
Well, in fact, can we skip ahead to this Epoch Times story? Because the Epoch Times just today is reporting that the CDC hid breakthrough COVID cases, meaning that they knew that people who were vaccinated were getting COVID at alarming rates, and the CDC decided to suppress this data. What's worse is that the data was from nursing homes. So the CDC knew from this military contractor called Humetrics that did a study, found that there was a rise in COVID cases amongst vaccinated seniors in nursing homes, and they knew this as early as January 2021. Now, January 2021, the vaccine was not even being rolled out into anyone who was not a senior. So they knew this from the first population that, oh, wait, they're still getting COVID. And also, they're more prone to go to the hospital having had this. This data is shown to have been in the CDC's hands. So when she says, let's do things we know work, I'm just wondering what data she sees that I don't see, because I am waiting. You can have it on my desk by morning for the studies that show that the vaccine did, in fact, lower hospitalization rates or death rates or any of that stuff, because I don't know where that study is.
No, as Dr. Peter McCullough has said in the past 24 hours, absolutely that's not the case. And you have literally Jean-Pierre at the White House press podium standing there saying that. She's lying right to you, flat out. And nobody in the corporate press that's in that room is calling her on it. And you have the White House press secretary saying these things they're trying to erase history. They're hoping that you will all be sheep, like one of my favorite Pink Floyd songs, and you'll just sort of blindly go with this story. Again, someone in the chat here who says it, Tom Winterborn says, this is so 2020.
Yeah.
I don't like it either. The thing is, it worked one time. They're revising a few things now, but they're literally rolling out the same playbook on this to control you. And, again, I come back to what Alex Jones had to say a few weeks ago. He told us that the TSA sources that he was speaking to said that COVID measures would return by mid-September. And is Joe Biden testing positive with this new variant on September 5th, the perfect timing for all of this? Here is Alex Jones in his own words. Watch.
I went and met with him. And had a cup of coffee with them. And they said, you got to warn people. Tuesday, we got called in, the managers, and told that by the middle of September, that the new policy is being written, that this is done. They were told this is happening. This is not hypothetical. You will all have to wear masks again, and so will airport employees. Then, by the middle of October, they are going to say that everyone flying has to wear a mask. And in the meetings, people began to ask them, well, why is this happening? They said, well, because of the new variant in Canada and because of the WHO, they may, declare this. But regardless, we've been told this is going to happen.
All right. So to give credit where credit is due, that was the original source. That was the original report on this TSA. And then, of course, some members of the government backtracking on this. No. You're already seeing it at airports. You're already seeing the groundwork being laid for it. It's only a matter of time before we'll see. We'll see if he's right here just in the next few weeks, right? Well, we'll see. Mid-September, what happens at the TSA? Or maybe they got so spooked because this news is out there. And we sort of front run, a lot of us in the independent media were front running this sort of false flag about how dangerous this is and all of this craziness, that maybe they don't do it. They don't force it on people. But my biggest concern, of course, is the kids, and making sure that they absolutely don't go back to this awful version of schooling again. Mm-hmm. And just absolutely, destroying these children. That's exactly what they're doing.
Well, and the one thing I remember is on a plane, people trying to keep a mask on a 2-year-old and getting kicked off the plane because the 2-year-old wouldn't leave its mask on, that kind of stuff. It's
it was awful. Yeah.
I want to see that again.
Our daughter was 4, and she would just suck on it and chew on it. And I was like, this is not this is not the reason. At least they were cotton, now that we know how toxic those single-use masks are, Anyway, all right. Well, we're going to move on and tell you about another friend of ours, and then we're going to talk about this story about perverts, how the mainstream media is perverts, how they want you to normalize perverts, how it's all part of an agenda to destroy your sexuality early so that you can give it to other people as a gift.
Real quick, I was trying to remember a friend of mine. Now, I'm not super close with him, but I used to interview him often. Rob O'Neill, the man who shot Osama bin Laden. I'd interview him on Fox all the time, and he was on a regular, so I was quite friendly with him. Remember, he said he wasn't going to wear a mask on a Delta flight into Montana, and then he got kicked off the flight, and then he was banned, I think, from Delta Airlines. And then they later apologized to him. Like after all the craziness subsided, they're like, "We're sorry. We should have never done that. Like your decision. You don't want to wear that." It was like, and now they're pulling the same crap again. It's like they all have amnesia about this stuff.
Yeah. I don't understand it. So
anyway,
thanks for thinking for yourself. So before we move on, I want to tell you about our friends over at BioOptimizers. Now, if you have problems sleeping at night, Clayton and I, we don't necessarily have problems sleeping. We have problems with a dog that wakes us up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And if we don't go and take him, then he has accidents on the floor. This is a problem. And then neither of us can get to sleep after. And this dog is messing with us. So one of the things we do, because we get back in bed and we're struggling to go to sleep, is we rely on magnesium. In fact, just last night I did that because, especially when the full moon, the dog goes crazy in the middle of the night. It's a problem. If you have trouble sleeping for any reason, dog or otherwise, really you should check out magnesium, because magnesium is unlike other supplements that might give you 1 to 2 forms of magnesium. Magnesium Breakthrough, the one we're talking about, contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind and help you stay asleep, fall asleep, wake up refreshed. It's not like a sleeping aid that you buy in the drugstore where you wake up feeling like a zombie. Over 75% of the population is magnesium deficient, and that contributes to a lot of sleep problems. What most people don't know is that even if they are taking a magnesium supplement, they're still deficient because they're not getting all 7 forms. So that's why we want you to check out Magnesium Breakthrough with our friends over at BioOptimizers. It is the ultimate way to give your body all 7 forms in one supplement. Not only does it help you sleep better, it also helps calm your mind and allows you to feel grounded. Maybe we should give it to the dog. I'm just kidding. We should not. Don't do that. I'm just kidding. But this dog problem is something. But, these days you never know what's stressing you out. And it's really hard, to get into a rhythm. We're all addicted to our screens, and that blue light doesn't help. So if you've struggled with any sleep problems at all, give them a try. So don't miss out on the most relaxing sleep ever with Magnesium Breakthrough. For an exclusive offer, our listeners can go to magbreakthrough.com/redacted. Once again, that's magbreakthrough.com/redacted. Use promo code redacted during checkout to save 10%. So again, this is just a much more natural way to help give yourself a sleep aid if you need it, and so many of us do. So that's magbreakthrough.com/redacted.
Now, people in the chat are giving us all sorts of advice on the dog. They're like, don't stop feeding him so late. We don't feed. We feed him at around 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
I don't think it's food.
That's Mogwise. That's
yeah. Don't after midnight. Don't do that.
I don't think it's always food, because a lot of times it's like the full moon and all the dogs in the neighborhood start barking, and he needs to go out and get involved in that.
It was like 2 a.m. Yeah, he just we took him out after the show, like before bed, and then he sleeps at the foot of our bed usually and goes to sleep. He's a little mini pincher, and then he heard something outside or whatever, another dog bark or a cat or something, then he needs to run out. But if we don't let him out, then he's going to do something on the floor.
Piano carpet, or leave us a nugget in the morning. So this is not fun, this sleep problem, because then we're awake like, oh, don't forget to do this. I got to call about the cupcakes and whatever, This was me last night.
All right. Well, we've got more news to get to here on the show. And we're going to talk about Elon Musk and the ADL vowing to release everything that the ADL has been using to go against political opponents and suppression of free speech and clamp down on things they don't like. Also, are we going to war with China? There's a number of headlines over the past 24 hours about China. The new Huawei phone, somehow they managed to pull off this new state-of-the-art cell phone despite U.S. sanctions. What's going on there? So we're going to talk about all of that. But let's talk about these perverts.
All right. Time for the headline about perverts. Here we go. Well, academics are arguing that we need to normalize youth sexuality and stop canceling people who normalize pedophilia. They said that. Now, we've been talking a lot about how this narrative creep around pedophiles has been relabeled what the progressive culture is calling MAPS, or minor attracted persons, like you're an adult and you're attracted sexually to minors. Well, the Archives of Sexual Behavior published an article calling youth sexuality the elephant in the room, like the thing we don't talk about that we should. Like this idea that youth need to be having sexual relationships with adults, and we need to be studying that. Here is the article. It's written by a guy named Marshall Burns, who calls himself a pioneer in the tech industry and also used to run a website called consentingjuveniles.com.
Really?
Yes. Yes. I'm choosing not to show you an image of that website. You can just go there yourself if you want to.
Don't even go there, please.
I don't recommend it.
Don't.
Yeah.
Do not go to that website. We are warning you, do not go to that website.
Okay, what it is this organization making the case that if you're a juvenile who's had a relationship with an adult and that adult got in trouble, and you want to advocate for the adult and say, no, I was consensual. I meant it.
I was 12 and I'm fine with it.
Yeah, basically saying that, like, oh, I'm so sorry I got my teacher in trouble. You know, I'm consenting here, but I'm a juvenile. Jesus. And I can. If you've ever read the book My Dark Vanessa, it's disgusting. This whole idea of
high praise. Let me add that to my summer reading beach list.
Don't. It was a book club book. I would not otherwise read a book like that. Anyone?
What's your recommendation on this book? It's disgusting, okay,
and like it's graphic about book. That was a book club
like
book.
Lolita. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
What he's arguing, though, is that people should not be canceled if they publish research saying that adult-child relationships are just fine and sometimes good for the young person. Here's what he means by elephant in the room. He says that youth sexuality, and in particular discussions of sexual relations between youths and adults without an a priori assumption of abuse or harm. So if you study adult-child relationships, you should not automatically assume that they are hurtful or harmful to the child. Now, I think that we should put a pin here and ask the question, harmful for who? Because if you're the adult, it might be harmful in that you can get arrested. But if you don't get arrested, you might think it's great for you. That's gross. If you harmful to the child, well, there's all manner of research showing that sexuality is very confusing for young people, that they cannot consent in a way that an adult can.
Yeah, Trumpzilla in our chat is saying minors can't consent.
Right. And also even minors who have relationship with other minors find that very confusing. Like kids who delay their sexuality end up having better grades, lower amounts of anxiety, higher earning potential. Because if you are someone who is just, their sexuality ran away from them, that's something that will distract you and be harmful to you for the rest of your life if you weren't ready for it. So this idea that not only should young people be sexually active earlier, but that it's A-okay for them to be sexually active with an adult is very troublesome. Now, here's one example of what he's talking about. He's saying it's really too bad that this guy, psychologist Theo Sanford, was canceled because he wrote this landmark study in 1988 research of students in the Netherlands who studied sexual relationships of youths with adults found them to be harmless and sometimes beneficial. Okay, again, beneficial to who? To the young people? I have a lot of questions on that. Here's another thing that he said. This is also too bad. This guy, this academic Rind, found that in many cases of sexual activity between youths and adults, there was no evidence of harm. Again, how are we defining harm? Who are we looking out for? Are we looking out for the adults or the child here? The article makes the case that because those people published those studies, they got canceled, and we really shouldn't do that. So here's a conundrum, right? That I understand, because we are redacted and we are free speech purists, and we think anyone should be able to make their point unless it incites violence. And we think you should stand up for the speech you don't like. Well, I 1,000% don't like the idea of normalizing adult-child sexual relationships. But then, do I want this speech canceled? Do I think those academics should be canceled?
No.
So that's a thought experiment. What do you think?
No, not at all. I mean, we're going to do a story on the ADL here, the Anti-Defamation League. They say all manner of horrible, horrible things. Awful, awful things, right? And I will defend them till the cows come home. They have every right to say it under the First Amendment. They can't incite violence and encourage people to go, and hurt other people, right? That's the line you don't cross. But no, they can say all manner of awful things. That's what the First Amendment does, is protect speech you don't like.
Right. So here's what he says that it does to the sexology community, which is a community I don't want to be involved in, that it puts them on notice that questioning the harmfulness of sex between adults and youth is strictly verboten. So there's been little new research about it since then to be canceled. Now, he's not an academic, this person. He only advocates for youth-adult relationships. But he's being allowed to publish in academia to say we really need more research about adult-youth relationships to show people that it's not harmful. So he has an agenda here for research that shows that it's okay to have pedophilia. That's basically what he's arguing with.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, David?
I was going to say there's people that are going to come to defend this just like they do gender affirming care. It's the same thing. They're going after the same people. And I think they keep using that word beneficial. I don't think it means what they think it means.
Yeah.
Because this isn't benefiting the kids. This is benefiting the pharmaceutical industry. It's benefiting the adults. It's benefiting all these people but the kids.
Yeah, exactly. Because they can say, no, they're wanting to talk, they're going through this transition. They're 12 years old. They need to have, they don't need their parents get in the way of this. We're going to put laws in place that we don't need to notify parents. Like, we need to make sure the kids are protected. All you need to do is read John Krakauer's great book, Under the Banner of Heaven. About was it the fundamentalists and the guys that have like 12 young girl wives, and how effed up those girls are as a result of it, and the people that escape that horrible life. Ask those girls what it's like to be sexualized and treated like this at such a young age.
Yeah, Dirty Doge 1 in Rumble says this is harmful speech, though. And I think that you can make the case, because if this comes into our lexicon and we start to enable this research that shows that, oh, it's not so bad. That person was glad that they had an affair with their teacher at 16. And it was good for them. It taught them a certain position. I don't know, then in that case, if we're normalizing this kind of speech, then we maybe empower people who will harm children. Absolutely.
Well, and here's the thing. Here's the problem. What happens with this is they will now get the right to say this, where like right now, we're free speech purists. We have the right to come on here right now and defend this, right, and shoot it down. But what's happened with the gender ideology is the more and more they are allowed to say these things, we are not allowed to counter that at all. So that's the problem, is if we're going to be denied the countering it, then they shouldn't be allowed to say it.
Well, this is exactly what I'm worried about, is that this becomes the new
normal,
the new marginalized group that we cannot speak out against. And because now it's being framed as, instead of minor attractive people or pedophiles, it's being framed as youth sexuality, as if it's serving a purpose for growing up.
Jeffrey
That's
Epstein
what I'm
died,
concerned about.
Jeffrey Epstein died too early.
Yeah, he would have
loved this new society.
He was
would have been
way ahead of his time.
This is great for him.
Now, I want to talk about this, because he talks about how this idea of youth sexuality that he's introducing to us has been conflated with pedophilia. What he says there is that youth sexuality, the former, focuses on the sexual feelings, behaviors, and experience of children and adolescents, which may or may not involve a pedophile. Now, I can't just throw that aside, oh, okay, it may or may not involve a pedophile, but a pedophile I don't mean to laugh, focuses on the attraction and actions of individuals to younger children. And he says this discussion here is about cancellation for studying youth sexuality. And so we're framing it around, is it good for the child? And we need to study that because he says that we treat sexuality like a tree without roots, and our sexual experiences in our youth is an important part of who we will be as sexual beings. But I can't just throw away that, like, but it may or may not. So your formative sexual experiences may or may not involve a pedophile. Is that okay?
No.
No,
you know,
I have trouble with the may part. If the may not, I'm okay with, but
yes.
What's the percentage chance?
Yeah. So you're saying there's a chance, and we're going to be okay with that. Youth sexuality has another appropriate name, puberty. So I'm just wondering if the term youth sexuality means that we maybe need to include adults in puberty. And is this an attempt to normalize throwing adults into puberty because they want to be there because they're perverts, right?
Or like having them involved in that process.
And this is it rings of a defense invoked by rapists. The whole, like, she wanted it, right? So we're saying that, like, oh, well, there's agency of the youth. It may be good for them. They may have wanted it, right? And so they have their own sexuality we need to enable. I would argue we don't, because of the research I just talked about how delaying sexual activity for adolescents actually usually ends up being quite good for them, because sexuality is confusing no matter what form it comes into your life. So, nevertheless, having not read the Theo Sanford 1998 book about men-boy relationships in the Netherlands, I have many questions about this conclusion that it is not harmful, and I have a lot of worries that we may normalize this and reframe it around youth sexuality instead of the deviance of the pedophile, but like, what does the child want? In the same way we think a child knows their gender identity at 3. And so I'm rejecting this term wholeheartedly. You do what you want with it. And I will especially reject it if it means that then it's enabling predators to get closer to children.
Let us know your thoughts on this.
What letter they're going to get on the LGBT? They're going to get M or P? Which one do we think they're going to add?
Well,
yeah, so someone in the chat saying P. I think P would be the, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll be adding that to the flag next.
Yeah.
I mean, the flag has just been inundated. It started out as like a rainbow flag. Now it's got this like
the triangle,
the trans chevron that's shoved in the corner now. Then they'll have like the pedophile thing shoved in there too. It's going to be. Man.
There already is imagery for pedophiles. But again, this is an argument for academia to normalize it. And so I do feel like gender ideology started in academia and started to sort of push out into the common culture. If this is something that we think is going to be pushed on us, I think we should be warned about it, because a lot of us were sort of blindsided by gender ideology.
Let's be clear where it started. It started at the biopharmaceutical companies, and they used academia as a tool to push it out there. It started in biopharmaceutical companies funding academic research that pushed it out there.
So much so that it even changed.
It started straight out of academia. It started straight out of like college campuses. I
don't want to talk about the history of genders for you. That's a little bit overly, but okay, yes. But that's not what I'm concerned about here. What I'm concerned about is that this becomes normalized in a way that then we were, in the same way we're arguing for single-sex spaces to protect women, or, homosexuals or what have you. I think that we should argue against studying and exploring youth sexuality as it results to including adults.
All right. Let us know your thoughts on this in the chat below. All right. We've got more news to get to on the show. We're going to talk about the ADL and Elon Musk suing the Anti-Defamation League, saying, we're going to release everything that they've been holding back, and how they've been banning speech and who they've been going after, all of that. Plus, we're going to talk about the coming war with China. At least that's what the mainstream media would have you believe about the war, coming war with China. Is it true, or are these just mainstream media scaremonger tactics that we're going to get to? But first, are you an investor looking for an easier way to trade stocks, and would you like 16 free stocks right now? 16 free stocks. You can get those with our favorite trading platform, our friends over at Moomoo. There is no steep learning curve. It has a simple interface. It's easy to use, so even beginners can take advantage of the stock market in no time. Plus, it offers powerful tools often reserved for experienced investors like customizable watch lists, advanced charting capabilities, and so much more. And now Moomoo has even added powerful earnings calendar, so you don't have to hunt and peck trying to find the earnings schedule for your favorite companies. And right now, for a limited time, they are giving away 16 free stocks. And one of those free stocks is either a Tesla stock or a Google stock, depending on which one you get. Anyway, when you open your account and you make your initial deposits in the account, that is when you can get those 16 free stocks. So anyway, go over there today and open up in a free account, because even if you do nothing else with the account, like you just open it, make your initial deposits, and it's like a savings account. You don't have to trade stocks if you don't want to. Just keep it and let these stocks grow. I mean, the stock market has taken a hit lately, so you might be getting some of these for pretty cheap. And then, watching these things grow over time, it's up to you. But you know what? And you can sell them. You can sell them off and get the free money, whatever you want to do with them. But you be kind of crazy not to take advantage of it, just to open the account and get those free stocks. So check it out. Go to our link on our screen, which is redacted.inc/Moomoo. Again, that's redacted.inc/Moomoo.
Well, the Anti-Defamation League may have the lawsuit of its life on its hands if what Elon Musk is saying on Twitter, or X, is true. He's saying, yes, we are very seriously considering suing them because he says they have been actively discouraging advertisers from advertising on Twitter, taking away nearly half of the company's ad share. How are they doing this? Well, here's just one example we talked about just last December, where the New York Times published their research saying that Twitter was a hateful place. They used that as fodder to tell advertisers not to go there. Now, was it because of hate, or was it because of maybe wrongthink? They go on to just publish a list of people they don't like, that they think are misogynist, or, don't fit the bill for what they think is acceptable. So it's interesting to watch this happen. And it would be interesting to think about what we would get to see watching a lawsuit like this. So Redacted correspondent Dan Cohen joins us to discuss. It would be fair to say that you don't like the ADL. In fact, the CEO once on Twitter called you a jerk. So whereas most media outlets might say you've been critical, let's just say you don't like them. They're not your favorite. So I'm glad for your take on this today. What can you tell us about the ADL in general, and what a lawsuit like this might mean?
Yeah, for me, it's a big badge of honor that Jonathan Greenblatt, the ADL CEO, I think it was in 2017 or so, called me a jerk on Twitter. So, I wear that with pride. But,
okay, that's not my experience of you. Just in case we're ringing in on whether Dan's a jerk, I'm going to say you're not. So.
I mean, I think I'm a pretty nice person, but sometimes I have strong opinions.
We can all be jerks.
You might disagree with. So
yeah,
we all have that within us. But my opinions on Zionism and the state of Israel were not welcomed by Jonathan Greenblatt. So he thinks I'm a jerk. So we'll just get that out of the way.
Okay.
But I mean, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, has come into, as you were describing, Natalie, has come into some kind of clash with Elon Musk's X, formerly known as Twitter. That New York Times report back in, I think, December of 2022 that said there was this huge spike in anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism since Elon Musk took over was sourced from, there were two sources. One of them was the ADL. So immediately the ADL took issue with Elon Musk. And it's primarily an Israel lobby outfit that seeks to muzzle any speech critical of Israeli policy or call you a jerk, and the special relationship between the United States and Israel to the tune of $3.8 billion per year. So it does this with accusations of anti-Semitism. If you look at its reports, the ADL's reports, you'll find instances of people saying Free Palestine listed as an anti-Semitic incident. So it'll kind of conflate actual anti-Semitic incidents with just people saying, well, there should be equal rights for Palestinians and Israelis. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is considered hate speech by the ADL. So it's not really about anti-Semitism as it is about protecting or basically smearing any criticism of Israeli policy as anti-Semitism. There's a really great documentary called Defamation, and it's by an Israeli filmmaker named Yoav Shamir that came out, I think, in 2009. So I really recommend everyone watch that, and you'll really get a sense of what the ADL has been in decades past, and really has kind of become gone on like steroids in its censorship efforts over the last, 15 years, 10 years. But it's not just about Israel and the special relationship. It's also very close with the police and FBI. It trains law enforcement. Its vice president of security and law enforcement, a guy named Russell Rosenthal, had a 25-year career in the FBI before he went to the ADL. It's also funded by corporate donors, which it won't say who they are. You cannot find out who these corporate donors are. It's not transparent at all. But what it does for them, for these mega donors, is weaponize anti-Semitism on their behalf, weaponize charges of anti-Semitism. So, for example, the ADL awarded Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla its Courage Against Hate Award. Here's Bourla's acceptance speech.
This award is especially meaningful to me because it comes from an organization whose mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all is so critical and so close to my heart. And it calls to mind one of Pfizer's own core values, equity.
So then we have the ADL saying that anti-vax sentiment, questioning whether novel pharmaceutical products are good for you or your children, the ADL says that is anti-Semitism.
COVID has led to a new form of variant of anti-Semitism.
The ADL is also very close with U.S. intelligence. You have Yael Eisenstadt, who's the head of the Center for Tech and Society, Combating Hate and Extremism Online. That's a part of the ADL. So she's likely to be one of these key figures promoting this idea that hate speech has taken over social media and Elon Musk's X. Her LinkedIn shows that she spent 13 years as a senior intelligence officer in the CIA and in the National Counterterrorism Center. So I don't know, once CIA, always CIA, maybe? Are you ever really a former spook? So what is the relationship between the ADL and the national security state? That's a very important question that we don't know a lot about. But ultimately, the ADL is really an arm of the deep state, of the establishment that's seeking to police speech on social media all around, and in particular on X, formerly known as Twitter. And Elon Musk, I think, doesn't want him to do that because it damages the brand, and he wants to be in control of censorship. Remember his whole freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach policy, which is kind of, that is censorship. You can say what you want. Maybe we'll just make it so you're sitting in a corner and no one can hear you. That's like the kind of censorship 2.0 on X.
Downranking.
And then he gave a similarly... Right. So he gave a similarly contradictory statement yesterday on Twitter saying, to be super clear, I'm pro-free speech, but against anti-Semitism of any kind. To me, that's totally contradictory. Free speech includes speech we don't like, as long as it's not incitement to violence. That's what's considered free speech. So we have disagreements with all kinds of people who may have odious opinions, but it falls within the realm of free speech.
Well, wouldn't you think that
Elon's-
maybe him
Go ahead.
saying, I'm against anti-Semitism would be, this is my personal opinion, I don't like it and I don't agree with it, but I believe it should be able to be said. You didn't read it that way?
I did not. I mean, I'm pro free speech, but against anti-Semitism of any kind. I mean, I'm against anti-Semitism too, but I mean, is he talking about policy or his personal opinion? It seems more like he's talking about policy to me. But I don't like anti-Semitism, but I don't think we should ban anti-Semitic speech because it doesn't make it go away. And then in fact, I think, if you're trying to think from like the point of view of someone who is anti-Semitic, it sure looks like it kind of like makes it seem like it's coming true. Like he's being told by the ADL, what to do and what's being allowed to said. So what's allowed to be said. So I'm pro free speech, but not that free speech. Right.
Right. And,
so
we've talked many times about the broadening of a definition of something that's anti-Semitic. The example you just said, that if you think that you want to say free Palestine, that comes off as anti-Semitic, right? Or, I mean, we've had so many examples that we can think of that, yes, we have to speak out for the widening of the net of things that maybe you may think is an acceptable way to feel. And even if it's not an acceptable way to feel, we have to speak for the speech that we don't like if we're true free speech purists. So I'm not sure how to read that, but something that strikes me about this is that the ADL may have started as this anti-Semitism organization, but now has widened into gender ideology, COVIDism, even, they're after libs of TikTok. That kind of thing. So, it almost feels like ideological creep, and anything that falls under this umbrella of wrongthink just needs to be dragnetted. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I think it's basically because anti-Semitism is the most potent charge because of what's, happened to Jews, and Jews are kind of like, we are the establishment's favorite victim. The ultimate victim, then that charge is so powerful. And then the ADL comes and basically sells it. They can, how much did Pfizer contribute to the ADL for them to say that, like, an average mom who doesn't want to put pharmaceutical products they don't know anything about into their kid is an anti-Semite? They sell it. They cheapen anti-Semitism. It's all for sale. So that's what's so odious about it to me. And it's really, whatever company or corporation that's part of the establishment wants to buy their product of weaponizing anti-Semitism, that's who they'll sell it to.
Right. And so advertisers that can't see this nuance will just stay away because they're so afraid. Is that what you think is happening?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we have to take his word for it that it's really cost X's bottom line that they're not able to bring certain advertisers on there. And he said it's cost them like half of the net worth of the company, $22 billion, which is a huge amount of money. I think Elon's the thing I think with Elon is his bigger goal. Maybe this gets in the way of his bigger goal. Smearing X as this hotbed of racism and anti-Semitism. He's trying to turn it into this all-encompassing digital ID system that's used, for everything from communications to finance. So that's his goal, is to turn it into a huge digital ID. The sort of trick or the contradiction to me is that we learned in August that the verification process that Musk is rolling out with Linda Yaccarino, formerly of the World Economic Forum, will be going through an Israeli company called, I don't know how you say, AU10TIX, AU10TIX. And that actually requires a selfie and a government-issued ID. So they can scrape this biometric data. And this company, AU10TIX, is formerly known as ICTS International and was founded by Israeli intelligence veterans. So, I think that Elon Musk is sort of a controlled op in the sense. So if we're going to, we don't like the ADL policing speech and cheapening anti-Semitism. So we're supposed to go along with Elon Musk's plan to roll out digital IDs. So Twitter, to participate in Twitter, you now have to submit biometric data. That's sort of the nuance that I think we need to see.
Right. So behind Elon Musk is not this utopia of free speech and thought and movement in the world. So we need to be careful about that.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for bringing your perspective on this. I look forward to watching this unfold if it does, and what it means for the rest of us for free speech and advertisers and all of that. So good to see you as always. Thanks. That's Dan Cohen for Redacted.
Thank you, Natalie.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. All right. Well, coming up, we are going to talk about a rundown of anti-China stories that have been all over Western media, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, New York Times. Some truly bizarre headlines. For instance, don't go asking strangers at military bases for directions to a Burger King because they'll think you're a Chinese spy. Very strange.
It's really weird.
One of our favorite analysts about Chinese headlines and East-West relations is going to join us, Carl Zaw, so stay tuned for that. But first, we want to tell you about the Redacted store, because this is another way that you can support independent journalism and signal that you are part of our free speech purism, that you're part of our community, that you're part of a community that seeks
the truth.
Seeks to talk about truth, all of that stuff. And you can find all sorts of merch over at redactedstore.com. So we have hats, we have hoodies just in time for fall. We have mugs and travel mugs for your pumpkin spice latte, if you're into that, because that launches in just a few days. We are hotly divided in this house about the pumpkin spice latte and also on this show. Philip doesn't like it. Some of us do like it. I concede that it does feel like eating a wax candle. But
we are not divided on the store.
Yeah, we're not divided on the store. So anyway, you can drink whatever you want out of those mugs. So check it out. Head on over to redactedstore.com. We try to sell you these things at close to their value in production. We don't make a big profit on it, but it's great. And if you do buy yourself something over at redactedstore.com, send us pictures, because we'd love to see you using your merch out in the wild. We also should mention that this is the place you should go for this. We had a friend who wrote us and said that they had got scammed by some fake Redacted store on Facebook. We don't sell on Facebook. And so we encourage you one more time to head on over to where this merchandise is legitimately sold, redactedstore.com.
Well, if you woke up this morning, you probably were met with a barrage of anti-Chinese headlines in the mainstream media, the corporate media. And whenever I see a sort of a coordinated effort on different headlines by mainstream publications, I'm always a little skeptical, a little cynical. The cynical bastard in me pops out. So let me just run through a quick number of these here. The Wall Street Journal reports that Chinese spies are infiltrating the U.S. military bases by asking for a Burger King. That's a weird story. We'll unpack that. China is said to be readying to conduct military exercises with Russia and North Korea in response to the U.S. conducting military exercises in South Korea. And then this Huawei phone story. This is pretty amazing. The Wall Street Journal reporting that Huawei introducing a brand new smartphone, but how in the world did they pull that off, given the fact that there's massive amounts of U.S. sanctions? Did they find a loophole here? So to unpack all of this and about all these China headlines simultaneously, we wanted to bring in Carl Zaw to discuss this and break this all down. Carl, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Hi, Clayton. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So let's start with the phone thing, because that seems to be like a simple entry point here. The Wall Street Journal, this Huawei story, that's all, everyone's in a rage about this, that they can get a new Huawei phone. But how in the world they are able to pull this off? The Wall Street Journal, the U.S. seems to be shocked that Chinese basically avoided U.S. sanctions, were able to create one of the best smartphones in the world. How do they do this?
Exactly. It's no secret that U.S. is trying to kill Huawei for a long time. They had sanctions on Huawei. They had arrested the Huawei founder's daughter, Meng Wanzhou. They had her arrested in Canada, put her under house arrest for busting Iran sanctions. And I think that the trigger is when the Huawei moved to the 5G technology. That really freaked the U.S. government out, because Huawei has been building out telecom networks all across the world. Here I am sitting in Bali, Indonesia. We are using the 4G network that's built by Huawei. But when Huawei moved on to 5G, U.S. decided that's not acceptable. They actually stopped their allies like United States, like UK and UK, Canada, Australia, all the Five Eyes countries using Huawei. One of their excuse is national security, because the U.S. intelligence agencies, they have a back door to all the telecom networks. But their concern if Huawei start to build these telecom networks in UK, in Germany, in Australia, not only U.S. intelligence agency won't able to get a backdoor, but they think, well, then the Chinese government will get a backdoor. So that's not acceptable for them. So this is why they pushed for the Huawei ban. But it did not stop there, because they also asked, before the Huawei 5G phone, for example, they require U.S. components. For example, Qualcomm. They need the Qualcomm design chips that's manufactured on Taiwan by the TSMC. The U.S. have told Qualcomm, no, you can't sell to Huawei, and it tells the TSMC on Taiwan, no, you cannot sell to Huawei. So Huawei's phone business actually died for a couple of years because they're not able to get the chips. They were able to design domestically a chip to replace the Qualcomm chip, but they still don't have the manufacturing capability to actually making the chips. So like 90% of the world advanced semiconductor chip are the orders sent to Taiwan, and TSMC make them. And then Huawei cannot even, and TSMC, the semiconductor manufacturing is very complex process with very diversified global chains. For example, the TSMC, they also depend on other technology to make the chips. They depend on this machine called the EUV machine, the extreme ultraviolet lithography machine that use lasers to etch this like very small, tiny transistors on semiconductors. And so U.S. also asked Netherlands government to ban the Netherlands company ASML, stopping to send those machines to China. So even Huawei want to make those chips themselves using the ASML machines, they couldn't. So it's quite a shock when Huawei came out with this phone. So how they did it is there's two type of machines that ASML makes. One is called the DUV machine. It's called the deep ultraviolet machine, and the other one called the EUV machine, the extreme ultraviolet machine. The DUV is older technology, and that's why it's not on the sanction list yet. So ASML can still sell to Huawei DUV machine at least until beginning of 2024. So Huawei is buying them in bulk. And what they have figured out is there was a process to make 7 nanometer chips using those older technology DUV machines. Taiwan actually figured out back in 2017, but it's an older technology, older method. It's not as efficient as using the DUV machines, but Huawei has no choice because they don't have access to ASML's latest UV machines. So they were able to replicate the process that TSMC used to make the 7 nanometer chips using the older DUV machines, but they were able to produce at a commercial scale. So people probably don't realize this. China spent $400 billion on chip imports before the U.S. chip ban. China spent more on chip imports than they spent importing oil. So now all that money is not coming to the United States. All that money is not going to the United States, not going to Netherlands, not going to Taiwan. Or that $400 billion now going to research and development to make China's own indigenous method of manufacturing chips. So that's why they had this breakthrough. They will still have faced a little bit of headwind because now latest iPhone is using like 3 nanometer chips from Taiwan. And to make that, you need the UV machines. I think China will eventually get it. Maybe it takes them 5 years. But for Huawei, it's a big breakthrough for the end consumers. They don't care whether you have 7 nanometer chips or 3 nanometer chips. As long as you provide the functionality, they're happy. And Huawei is able to do that.
Let's talk about this Wall Street Journal story also about Chinese spies infiltrating the U.S. military bases and coming in and asking for a Burger King. And then also these military exercises. They're supposed to be teaming up with Russia on these joint military exercises as North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is set to travel to Russia via an armored train. That is the report today. So it seems that relationship is growing even more strong. What do you say about these Chinese spies infiltrating U.S. military bases? Angle, what do you know of this story?
Well, I hope they caught them. I mean, I read the report. It's very vague. They say there have been instances of Chinese tourists or claiming they're tourists trying to run past military installations looking for their hotel. So, if they're spies, I hope they caught them, prosecuted them, charged them. But the report didn't say, how many people were charged, arrested, or convicted. Yeah. It's just an anonymous official dropping this tip to Wall Street Journal saying that these are instances of Chinese tourists gate crashing, and they call it the gate crashers, and they said this is a very increasing phenomenon. So first of all, U.S. is liable. All these people protecting U.S. military sites are liable to keep those secret sites off limits to outsiders. So I hope they're doing their job. And what I think they're really doing is spreading the story in United States at the time when U.S. and China are trying to restore the people-to-people exchange after COVID, because now they're Gina Raimondo was in Beijing. One of the things she talked about was they're going to increase the travel between United States and China back to the pre-COVID levels and get more Chinese tourists to come to United States. It seems to me some people don't want that to happen. Some people don't like the increased people-to-people exchange, and they would rather keep that to the minimum. I mean, that's why we're seeing these stories right now. This is my take.
Also, I've had sources telling me over the weekend that they've seen real trouble in China, and I want to get your assessment of what's happening in the Chinese economy, because if the Chinese economy collapses, it's going to have massive reverberations around the world. And the photos that I'm seeing and sources that I'm hearing from who were in China this past week saying it's in many ways unrecognizable to them. In Shanghai, for instance, I'm just going to share some photos here. They say normally going to Western restaurants, American-style restaurants, Starbucks, et cetera, is a bit of a status symbol thing to do. I don't know if that's correct or not, but in Shanghai, going to a Starbucks or going to these different restaurants, and many of them are empty, closed. Walking around on a Sunday or on a Monday in Shanghai looks like a Sunday in Germany. I've heard it described, where there's very little traffic, very few people sort of wandering markets and foot traffic. So there are suggestions that the Chinese economy is in real trouble. What do you say about that?
So first of all, I saw that tweet. It's by reporter Michael Yong. Said his friend sent him that pictures. Mm-hmm. So some people pointed out that the area that they took the photo at is Lujiakou. It's a place that rarely gets a lot of traffic normally anyway on a Monday, and because that was like a tourist area. And as for Western restaurant, it's true that Western restaurant was a status. Going to Western restaurant was a status symbol in Shanghai 15 years ago. It's true. It was true 15 years ago. So it's not so much true today.
So going to like a TGI Fridays is not a great status symbol anymore.
No. Maybe back in 2000, but yeah. But China, there's a lot of people right now. There's a lot of expats now heading back to China after the COVID restriction had been lifted. People can go look on YouTube their travels in Shanghai to see, to see for firsthand experience what it's like. But having said that, China's economy is in real trouble. It is actually slowing down. This has been the most serious slowdown in China for decades, and that this is true, including the high unemployment number for the youth from 16 to 24 age group. That's all true. This is one reason is because China is shifting away from the real estate driven investment, which has been driving the Chinese economy growth for decades. But it cannot go on forever because we know how real estate bubble ended up in the United States back in 2008, and this is why that China is going through a hard time transitioning right now. But I think it's a cyclical downturn. It's not a secular downturn. From my conversation with my friends and families in China, everybody is doing fine. The tourism right now is actually not letting down. There's a lot of domestic tourists, but they're slowing. The real estate developers are in trouble in China. A lot of them are going bankrupt. So that's going to create a drag for the economy. And this is also driven so some people running away from China to United States. So I'm sure some people have heard about Chinese refugees coming to U.S. Because Chinese economy is going through a hard time right now. That is true.
Yeah, I had a friend in Beijing saying that they've noticed a lot of small businesses troubled and closed. He lives and works there. He is Chinese, and says that is the case. That there is some real troubling signs there, especially among young people as well. So, again, I'm really, of course, I think we're all worried about what happens with a massive Chinese slowdown, and when consumers in the United States are also knee deep in credit card debt. They're not buying. You're under this massive weight of sanctions. And so what can Americans buy at these massively increased prices? This could have massive implications around the globe if we see a massive Chinese slowdown. So, yeah, I am worried about it. I am absolutely worried about it. Do you think we will see some sort of normalization of trade with the United States and maybe greener pastures soon to come?
So Gina Raimondo just in Beijing recently, and she basically said, look, we're not going to budge on this U.S. sanction on the high-tech sectors, because that's national security reasons, but we are still willing to sell China the other less sophisticated goods. She was literally hawking like U.S. domestic cosmetic products in Beijing. So I think that's a message Gina Raimondo was sent there to convey. They will still continue business with China outside of those high-tech sector restrictions. Now, does that mean that there's going to be a restoration of ties? I don't know. The decoupling, they have been returning it, de-risking. It is happening. Decoupling is already happening. For example, we already talked about the semiconductors, but even, U.S. have been pressuring multinationals to move their supply chain outside of China. So but in the last few years, interesting fact about the trade statistics, the U.S. imports from the rest of the world keep on going up, but the Chinese export to United States is going down. So the rise in U.S. imports is coming from countries like Mexico and Vietnam. But if you look at the trade between China with Vietnam and Mexico, they're going skyrocketing. So what's really happening is all these Chinese goods now get exported to Vietnam and Mexico for the final assembly. So they get slapped on made in Mexico and made in Vietnam. Right. And re-exported to the United States. And U.S. consumer just pay premium, that adds to the inflation.
Well, and the U.S. consumer can say, yeah, I don't get my stuff from China. Nike can say, yeah, we don't do our stuff in China anymore. Well, yeah, they do, but it's just done by proxy in Vietnam and the Philippines and other spots. But it's still basically coming from China. This is the shell game that they play here. So, very interesting. Thank you for helping us to unpack some of these headlines here, especially around the military spies invasion, as well as, I guess I didn't ask you here, but I'll get you out of here on this, Carl, which is on the military exercises, the Chinese and joint Russian military exercises. What do you make of that?
Right. So related note, to talk about all the spy, including spy bloom and all that, people seem to forget we live in the age of satellites. The Chinese Beidou system have 45 active satellites in the sky, where the GPS only have 31 active satellites. I listened to a Taiwan journalist Paul Wang on the Manifold podcast a few weeks ago. Paul Wang said any Taiwanese ballistic missile site, they will have a Chinese satellite flying over it every 20 minutes. So, I mean, like, you know, do Chinese really need to fly a slow ass balloon across America? I mean, okay. So, right. That aside, China and so Russia and North Korea has been getting closer because Russia is looking to source more weapons, conventional weapons from North Korea for their war effort, which is understandable because I was in Russia late June during the Prigozhin coup. One thing about Moscow, what I see is not a society that's mobilized for war. I mean, people who have seen my travel logs on my YouTube channel will see that. They will say, oh, this doesn't look like a country at war, which is true because Putin is calling this a special military operation because he's trying to do it with minimum disruption to average people's life. So this is why the Russian industry haven't really geared up for like a total war situation. So this is why they're looking to North Korea to source more weapons, conventional weapons, and North Korea has nothing to lose. They're already sanctioned by the United States. U.S. can't sanction North Korea anymore. But for the military exercise, China and Russia has been conducting the joint naval exercise in the Sea of Japan, and recently they just sailed across Alaska through the Aleutian Island chain. And now there's talk about North Korea will join the two to do a trilateral patrol. This is in response to a recent U.S. military drill with South Korea. So now we are seeing two blocks shaping up in East Asia. We have the trilateral alliance between U.S., Japan, and South Korea on one side, and the other side we have China, Russia, and North Korea. So we live in interesting times, Clayton.
Yeah, we certainly do. And it's going to be interesting to see Europe's response in all of this, which is a place, that is on the verge of energy crisis as we enter in this winter period as well. So very interesting. Carl Zall, thank you so much for joining us here. Great to catch up with you. And thanks for diving into a bunch of these headlines today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for inviting me.
So our thanks to Carl. We really appreciate it. And I would just want to say thanks to all of you for subscribing to the show, which is totally free. We'll just, if you're on YouTube, just hit the subscribe button. And on Rumble as well, you can follow us there and subscribe. And my thanks to all of you for sharing the show. I ran into a viewer this weekend who said he loves the show. He's from France. And he said he shares the show to all of his family and friends and on a regular basis. He said he's not sure if they're ready to hear it or not, but he still does that. And so I just want to say thanks to all of you that do share our segments out with people who might be sort of under the control of the corporate media still, the people that are still watching CNN and they're still watching the mainstream media. So my thanks to all of you for doing that. And we will be back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, everyone, have a great night.